Good Wednesday morning, everyone. Americans waking up to a political shockwave overnight.
A return to power for Donald Trump, elected the 47th president of the United States. Good morning. It's November 6th, and this is Today. A red wave.
Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time.
Former President Trump, now the president-elect, dominating the swing states to seal an historic return to the White House.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have.
Trump's path to victory driven by issues like the economy, a surge in support from Hispanic voters, and a gender gap led by young men.
This is my first time voting at all.
Republicans also scoring major upsets to seize control of the Senate.
This is a new dawn of Republican leadership.
This morning, we'll break everything down. What went right for Trump and the GOP, what went wrong for Harris and the Democrats, and what it all means for America's future. Today, Wednesday, November 6th, 2024.
From NBC News, this is a special edition of Today, Decision 2024.
Good Wednesday morning, guys. 7 a.m. on the West Coast, 10 a.m. here in the East. We're so happy you're with us. We actually are rolling on with a special edition of Today because it's the morning after the election. Savannah's catching some Z's, yes. Well-deserved after doing her coverage all night and into the morning. And Jenna is home resting
She's
at
home.
10.
Yes. It's a valid point.
Yeah. All right. The nation, Wall Street, the world, all now reacting to the news that Donald Trump will make an historic return to the White House. The former president, now the president-elect once again. NBC News projecting he has eclipsed the 270 electoral college votes.
And take a look at this path to victory. It's a bit surprising to a lot of folks. Trump busting through that blue wall, winning both Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Michigan at this hour, still too close to call. Mr. Trump also carried the South, including the key swing states of Georgia and North Carolina. The president-elect claiming victory during a speech at his watch party in Florida overnight, saying voters have given him a, quote, powerful mandate for his agenda over the next 4 years.
Also this morning, we are closely watching that battle for Congress. We can tell you that Republicans will control the Senate after flipping several seats. No surprise there. The House at this point, and perhaps for weeks to come, still up for grabs. We're covering all of this morning. Let's begin with NBC's Garrett Hake, who is with the Trump campaign. Hey, Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Hoda, good morning to you. And Donald Trump's victory in this campaign was as complete as it was stunning. Even he seemed somewhat surprised by it last night. But you have a campaign in which he knocked out President Biden over the summer, overcoming Kamala Harris last night by winning at least 2 out of the 3 of those so-called blue wall Democratic states. And now we'll have the first president in more than 100 years serving non-consecutive terms. Mr. Trump returning to Washington with what he calls a powerful and unprecedented mandate.
Look what happened. Is this crazy?
Overnight, a stunning victory for Donald Trump, with NBC News projecting the 45th president is now set to serve again as the nation's 47th.
This will truly be the golden age of America.
The former president flipping back critical battlegrounds he lost in 2020, celebrating his victory with supporters in the early morning hours.
This will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country.
Trump trading in his often fiery rhetoric, instead calling for unity.
It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite, and we're going to try.
Though notably not mentioning President Biden or Vice President Harris or their supporters in his remarks. Instead, focusing on his next term with a Republican-controlled Senate.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate.
On stage with his family, Trump also touting several high-profile allies, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who he said will have a role in his next administration, and spending several minutes praising billionaire Elon Musk, who spent tens of millions of dollars supporting Trump's campaign.
We have a new star. A star is born, Elon.
Running mate J.D. Vance also taking the stage.
We just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America.
The former president winning with a coalition driven by white voters, men, and first-time voters, a group he lost in 2020 but won this year.
They came from all corners, union, non-union, African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Arab American, Muslim American. We had everybody, and it was beautiful.
During the campaign, Trump had focused heavily on immigration, painting the immigration debate in dark terms.
Black voters are furious with Kamala over illegal immigration. It's destroying their communities.
His support with black and Latino voters higher in key swing states. Latino men in particular flocking to Trump, favoring him by a 10-point margin after backing Joe Biden by 23 points 4 years ago. The economy also a major focus, tying Harris to incumbent President Biden, also seeming to pay off with voters in the all-important Midwest states.
Think about this. This isn't the Republican Party of old. President Trump has completely remade the Republican Party to be the party of the working class.
And looks ahead to leading a divided country.
We're going to help our country heal.
At 78, Trump will also be the oldest president ever elected and the only one with a felony conviction. Now, remember, he still has several other criminal cases pending against him, although some of those, at least, are likely to be dismissed by a Justice Department that he will soon control. Now the focus shifts to a transition, staffing up a cabinet and a White House, goals that will be simpler with that new Republican Senate that will join him in D.C. next year. Craig, Hoda.
All right, Garrett Haake for us there in West Palm. Garrett, thank you.
Meanwhile, the co-chair of the Harris campaign talked to her supporters overnight, saying that the vice president will address the nation at some point today. NBC's Monica Alba joins us now from the White House. Monica, first of all, any guidance on when we might hear from Vice President Harris?
Well, we do expect Vice President Harris to address the nation and her supporters from Howard University later today, Craig. But before that, she is also expected to call President-elect Trump to concede this race. Of course, she was supposed to make it to that site, her alma mater, that university in Washington, D.C., overnight, but she never arrived there, given the fact that they were still waiting for some of those results to roll in before deciding to address the nation today instead. And I'm told she is currently working on her speech and her address, and the timing is still fluid. But it's notable here as well that President Biden plans to also call President-elect Trump at some point today, I'm told, and he will also address the nation at some point about the election results. And we're still waiting to hear exactly when that is going to take place as well. But he will be taking an approach to Donald Trump's victory in many senses in a way that he will try to do the things that back when Donald Trump lost in 2020 and Joe Biden won in 2020 didn't take place. So we will see President Biden call to congratulate him, invite him to the White House, and he plans to attend his inauguration, the White House has said. So that is a really important moment here in Washington in terms of what comes next for this historic day. But we are also expecting really the president to take the vice president's lead. And she is somebody who has said that she will respect the rule of law and the outcome here, which is something that she will talk about when she does speak later today. And we know for now that the staffers at the Wilmington, Delaware headquarters, which is left over from when President Biden was at the top of the ticket, are going to be convening and likely heading to Washington for her final speech. And then there will also be a message of urging this calm and acceptance of the results, which we expect to hear from both the president and the vice president. Hoda.
All right, Monica, thank you so much. What do you say we fire up the big board once again and crunch the latest numbers with NBC's national political correspondent, Steve Kornacki. So, Steve, there were a bunch of surprises overnight. One of them is the youth vote traditionally goes to the Democrats. Not so much in this one.
Yeah, big movement here. Let's call up the exit polls from last night. Take a look. Okay. Voters under 30. And we got here a comparison to what happened last night and what happened 4 years ago. So last night, Now, Democrats still won. We say Democratic candidate because it was Harris last night, Biden in 2020. So Harris wins the youth vote by 13 points. But 4 years ago, Joe Biden won it by 24 points. So basically got cut in half. And the other interesting part about this is overall, we had a gender gap last night, but it wasn't as big as people were expecting it to be. But it was massive among the youngest voters. Among men under 30, Harris won by 2 points. Wow. Among women under 30, Harris won by 36 points. So the gender gap is growing among the youngest group of voters. Overall, less Democratic, but look at that gap.
Thought it was also interesting that in the last election, Biden won women by a larger margin than Harris won women in this election.
Yeah.
That's the case?
And it's not just that. In the last election, too, that share that Biden had among women was a bigger margin with women than Trump had with men. Last night, it was a wash. Trump won men by 10. Harris won women by 10.
Let's look back at the board and let's talk about Texas for a second, because Texas was one of those states that some Democrats were thinking maybe we can make some inroads here. What happened?
Yeah, Democrats had two hopes in Texas. In their I dream night, they were going to win Texas in the presidential race. And not only did that not happen, but this for Trump, just check this out compared to what happened 4 years ago. Trump won here by less than 6 points in 2020. He more than doubled that margin in Texas. But what Democrats were really hoping for out of Texas last night was they really don't like Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz. They thought they could unseat him last night. The polling had been closer in that race than in the presidential, and it was closer than the presidential. I'll take this one off just so you can see there. But Cruz does win this thing comfortably in the end. You know, one of the things in Texas, we'll put the presidential results back up there. One of the things that powered Trump and Republicans, Cruz included, look down here, you know, deep South Texas along the border. You see a lot of red in here. These are overwhelmingly Hispanic counties. I just want to show you, back in 2016 when Trump first came on the stage, this was all blue in here. He has turned the border red.
You can see what happened. Let's talk about Iowa, because there was that big Des Moines Register poll that said, wow, it looks like Harris is actually winning in this red state. Everybody was shocked. People were saying, are there going to be more Iowas out there? Actually, Iowa stayed red.
Yeah, there were more Iowas out there, just not in the direction people were thinking, I would say. You know, what was in that poll that got so much attention? The pollster had a great track record. That's why people were saying, maybe there's something here. The story behind it in those numbers was there was incredible movement among women in the suburbs, independent women, senior women, that was going to power. We thought maybe connected to abortion, but I'll tell you what, Dallas County, this is the classic suburban county right outside Des Moines. And I can show you, Trump wins there. And again, it ends up being better for Trump this time than last time. If anything like that poll had been happening, this would have been a landslide or a big win for Harris there.
And Steve, we still have some states we haven't called. When do you expect that we might see some movement with those?
Yeah, so let's call up the national map here. I think the most immediate one potentially is in Michigan. You can see here it's about a 90,000 vote lead for Donald Trump. And I can tell you what we're waiting on mainly is coming out of Wayne County. This is Detroit. This is massive population-wise. We may get some clarity there today. The issue in Nevada and especially in Arizona, I'll just show you the results there. In Nevada, Trump does have a pretty strong 5-point advantage. They have vote by mail that can continue to come in, get counted. You know, that could take a bit. And in Arizona, you know, again, this is a good position for Trump to be in, but they do release big batches of that vote by mail over days now. So you want to see what that starts to look like, too.
All right, Steve, thanks so much. Craig, over to you.
Well, for a closer look at the campaign and what transpired at the polls yesterday, we want to welcome in Simone Sanders Townsend. She's the co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC. She also served as the chief spokesperson and senior advisor for Vice President Harris. I know you've been up all night as well, so thank you so much for your time. I mean, you know the vice president better than a lot of folks. You're still quite plugged into that staff, to that team. First of all, what's going on behind the scenes right now? I know we expect to hear from her in a few hours. What can you tell us about what might be happening behind the scenes?
So I will say that and this is par for, of course, for the vice president, you know, she did not, obviously, as we know, go out to speak last night at Howard University because she was not there. She was off-site with her family. And she didn't have a big meeting with a lot of people. It was a small group of people that were talking with her last night, still a small group of people of her trusted advisors that were speaking with her today. And it's my understanding that, first of all, when they went to bed last night, I don't know if the team actually believed that they could not overcome the gap. There was still a thought that there was still a path because they thought that there were more votes coming out of Pennsylvania. And to be very clear, there still are some votes left in Pennsylvania, but the gap was just too large to for the vice president specifically to overcome. Bob Casey may lose may lose in the state, and he is very well liked. So I think now when they woke up this morning, early this morning, there was a realization that, okay, it's not happening. What is the cadence of this? And what we are seeing right now behind the scenes is them figuring out what the cadence is going to be and what she is going to say. And her team feels like she ran a good race. And I've talked to a number of Democrats today, and me, myself, knowing her, I also think the vice president specifically, she left it all on the field. She campaigned very, very hard.
So the reality is, and again, the House hasn't been called yet. Republicans are going to win the Senate. Trump's going back to the White House. He's going to win the popular vote. It looks like he may very well reach 300 in the Electoral Vote College. It would seem to be about more than Vice President Harris's campaign. We just saw Steve digging into those numbers on youth voters, on women voters. There's going to be an autopsy. You've been a part of the Democratic Party for a long time. What does your party have to do to figure out how their message can resonate with more voters?
I've talked to a lot of the local strategists this morning. They've been on my phone, and the state elected officials, like state representatives in Pennsylvania, to be specific. And from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin to Michigan, they've all said the same thing to me. Some version of, look, we don't want to be Monday morning quarterbacks or Wednesday morning quarterbacks at this point, to be clear, but that they felt some indications of this, particularly one strategist who is very connected within the party apparatus in Pennsylvania said to me yesterday, they were speaking to a gentleman, and the gentleman, she said she didn't know a person in Pennsylvania, Black specifically, who had not seen that ad, that Kamala Harris is for they and they, them, and not us. And that resonated. They put a lot of money behind those ads. And so the perception that people had is that across the board is that Democrats, the they, them ads worked, and they're paying, $100 for groceries, and it's a little bit less. And the question that some of these voters had, according to the strategists on the ground, said, hey, well, that's what they're focused on. They're not focused on me. So I think that the autopsy and some of the soul searching is about how can the message break through, because the idea that, the Democrats don't have an economic agenda, right, that speaks to some of these working people is actually not true. But did the people feel it is the difference.
We got to get to weather, but to be clear, the ad that we're talking about is this ad that featured radio DJ, popular guy, Charlamagne the God, his sidekick, using Kamala Harris's own words, talking about using federal funds for transgender surgery. So
and that broke through in all of the states, because every Republican campaign was running those kind of ads in these key races.
Simone, thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Good to see you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.